Peter Mortimer. I'm the secretary of the Bridgeton Library Local History Group and a very keen local historian.
So let's talk about the kind of history of radicalism that runs like an artery through the East End of Glasgow, all the way back to, I suppose, the Carlton Weavers. Is that where we start?
Yeah, the Carlton Weavers have been identified as probably the first working class uprising in British history, and that was happening in 1787. The Carlton Weavers were handloom weavers in Carlton, and they produced bales of cloth at home, working the looms, and all the family would work in the business. And they were getting effectively a wage cut because they were getting less for a bale of cloth than they had done previously. And that was caused by cheap imports coming in from India. And that's something we're familiar with. And they were coming in. So the weavers started to protest in the summer of 1787, gathering down at Glasgow Green, which is a favourite spot for radical meetings in Glasgow. And it culminated in them marching up the Drygate to protest, and they got there in early September, and the city fathers were getting quite alarmed. They thought they had a revolt, a full-blown revolt on their hands. So they called out the military, and the military opened fire on them, and 6 of their number were killed. They're commemorated, 3 of them are commemorated in particular in the Carlton Burial Ground on Abercrombie Street, which as you go in the entrance there, immediately on your right hand side, there's a plaque on the wall dedicated to the Carlton Weavers who were shot dead. There's also, in a short distance from there, the grave of Reverend James Smith, who was a pastor to Abraham Lincoln at the White House.
And then, I mean, that's true all over Glasgow, all over the west of Scotland. We have the radical wars in Paisley and so on. And then Red Clydeside and so on. It's a kind of story that repeats itself.
It does. I mean, we've had it in relatively recent times with the Upper Clyde shipbuilders working in 1971, which was very radical in its structure. And of course, to the fore was Jimmy Reid with his famous speech, "There will be no bevying, the eyes of the world are upon us." The radicalism has not just been the male domain. We've had a lot of women who have done quite radical things in Glasgow, and to great effect. Everyone, I'm sure, is aware of Mary Barber, who stopped an eviction over in Linthouse near Govan. And another local woman for the East End was Betty McAllister. Betty was from Carlton. She was a councillor there. She had a shop where she sold mussels and whelks, which fed off the footfall to the Barras. And she met Margaret Thatcher at the Templeton Business Centre, the former carpet factory, and she gave her a piece of her mind. I'm quite sure in all her years in politics, Margaret Thatcher had never been spoken to like that. Betty McAllister had that.
And then there were the women that blocked the street.
The women that blocked the street in Parkhead, absolutely. That happened in the mid-70s, and it happened in Crail Street, which ran between Westmuir Street and Tollcross Road. And the street was being used by drivers to dodge traffic lights, and it was becoming a bit of a rat run. And there was a few kids knocked down, and the women said, "No more." So what did they do? Out into the middle of Crail Street, blocked the traffic, and made their point very, very succinctly.
So in the East End, what were the key industrial sites? What were the sort of
the key industrial sites? There were many. I'll just cherry pick a couple, if I may. One was not far from where we are just now, and that was the Dalmarnock Iron Works, which was founded by Sir William Arrow. He opened the ironworks and became extremely famous. Of course, everybody will tell you his biggest job was the Forth Rail Bridge, which is a World Heritage Status site over in the River Forth at Edinburgh to Fife. He also did Tower Bridge at London. He did the Manchester Ship Canal. He was an engineer par excellence. And if you've got a blue £5 note in your pocket, you've got William Arrow there because he's on the reverse side of it. Another major location in the East End was the Parkhead Forge, and in 1861 that was acquired by William Beardmore, who came up from London, and he was subsequently succeeded by his nephew William Beardmore in the business. and they built that, or he built it to become a conglomerate. During the First World War, the workforce of William Beardmore numbered 40,000 people, paying out £125,000 a week as a payroll, averaging £3 per week per employee. They had about 6,000 employees at Parkhead, at the forge. They built ships at Dalmuir. They built airships in Shannon. They built taxi cabs in Parkhead. They built motor vehicles in Dumfries. They had steelworks in Lanarkshire. They also seconded many small factories in right throughout the Glasgow area to do munitions during the First World War. And as a lot of the workforce of the 40,000 at that time was female. So they were, instead of making products, they were put on to making mortar bombs and goodness knows what. So that was a real important help in the war effort of the First World War.
And yet, if you walk the streets now, it's quiet. It's like the Proclaimers song. You know, we could say Brigton no more,
Yeah.
Dalmarnock no more.
Absolutely.
It seems extraordinary that all those skills, all that labour, all that history is no more than that. It's history now.
It is history. Sadly, it's history. But while it was there, it was the best show in town. It really was. It was fantastic. We've become global, and imports are flooding into the country all the time. They're coming from China, they're coming from Europe, they're coming from all over the place. And we have deindustrialised, as we know. We are no longer an industrial nation. And Bridgeton is no longer an industrial area, which it was big time. I mean, it's often been said Glasgow was the workshop of the empire. Well, Brigton, as I would call it, Brigton was the workshop of the workshop. It was just incredible, yeah. the amount of factories here. Starting off, of course, with the weaving industry, and then coming on to heavy engineering, pottery, chemicals, furniture making. The list is absolutely endless.
So now, I mean, part of the legacy of that, inevitably, unfortunately, is a degree of contamination of the land where these places were, and so it's inevitably taking time to deal with all that. And as we know, one of the great catalysts for dealing with that was the Commonwealth Games, which pulled down a lot of stuff, built some new stuff. What's your view of all that? Do you feel that good choices were made, that there's a kind of future now for the East End, different kind of future? What's your feeling about all that? I think
different kind is exactly the way to describe it. We will not return to 40,000 people working for a single employer. That's never going to happen again. We're into a different economy, a service economy as it's described. For the East End, the thing that amazes me is when I drive around the East End and I maybe do walking tours, so my feet are very much firmly on the pavement, I seldom see kids out playing. The streets are deserted, not just in Bridgeton, all over the Glasgow when I go out walking. It's just there's a lack of kids on the street, and I think kids at times were the glue of a community, because they were the ones that brought it all together, running up to each other's house, and their parents got to know each other and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know where that kind of leaves the whole community thing. And we're sitting in a community hub just now, and it seems very busy. But that's only one sort of community. The other one is the one where how well do you know your neighbours? Can you borrow the proverbial cup of sugar and so on? I don't know if that happens just now. In terms of the housing stock, there was a lot of housing stock lost in Bridgeton. Lots of tenements were demolished, and a lot it's all been replaced by. There's a lot of. Just make my way down here today, coming along Dalmarnock Road, Springfield Road. There's more flats going up everywhere. Better houses, absolutely. Better communities, I don't know.
Not sure yet. Perhaps only time will tell. Let me ask you one other question, which is kind of slightly separate, I guess, from anything else. I want to talk about the river. I don't want to talk about the river downstream beyond the weir, but this part up here. What part did that play in the lives of people that lived here, and what part does it play now?
One of the most noticeable parts it played was it was a boundary between the north and south. You had to cross a bridge to get over from Dalmarnock over to Rutherglen and the like, and just on the other side of the river at Shawfield, one of the biggest examples of contamination took place and that was with a company called White's Chemicals, and they had a chemical works just across the street from Shawfield, and the amount of stuff that they put into the soil was incredible, and it's just caused such an issue for the water courses in the area. There's bright green ponds lying over at Richmond Park, which feed into the water course, so it was that issue. In terms of what other part did the river play, the river was also used as a source of leisure. People would walk along the banks, some people would try their hand at fishing, and in fact along at Glasgow Green, just down from the football pitches, there used to be diving dales where people would dive into the Clyde, and it was called the Dominie's Hole, but they eventually had to abolish it because there were drownings. But people were actively, there was 4 diving boards cemented into the bank, and people would dive into the River Clyde there.
Really? I never knew that. That's
incredible.
Great detail. Yeah. That's excellent. Brilliant. Well, I think that's probably us. Thank you very much.